Today on Podio Commentary, we're diving deep into the 2016 found footage horror film Blair Witch, directed by Adam Wingard and written by Simon Barrett. This third installment in the Blair Witch series serves as a direct sequel to the iconic 1999 film The Blair Witch Project, while cleverly ignoring its less successful follow-up. Today we'll explore the film's secretive development process, its mixed critical reception, and the intense behind-the-scenes efforts to deliver genuine scares. Join us as we dissect the cast's performance, the production challenges, and the eerie connection to the original film. All of this and more here today on Podio Commentary. Hey, what's going on, everybody? How y'all doing? Welcome back to another episode of Podio Commentary. And today we're going to be talking about a movie that I shouldn't have waited 8 years to see, I'll admit. As a big Blair Witch fan, as a person who was so ready to believe that the original was a real film, I probably should have seen this sooner. But I think I didn't, because Book of Shadows was just not great in regards to expanding upon the lore of the original Blair Witch. And I think when this one came out, there was a bit of mixed critical reception, which might have kind of deterred me from going to see it. I don't like to say that I get influenced by bad reviews, but when you care about a movie as much as I care about the Blair Witch Project, and I'll give you a little anecdote that I said this in the original Podio Commentary that I did on it way back a couple of years ago. But back in the summer of 1999, I was convinced that this movie was probably a little bit real. And I had to see it. I was completely taken by the website, completely taken by the marketing. So much so that I was on a Yahoo Movies group chat, and one person had said that the movie leaked online. Now, this is, you got to remember, the summer of 1999. Movies leaking online was like a unicorn. You heard about it, there were whispers of it, but you never really knew if it was real. You never really knew what to expect. And so I set about a scheme to try to get my hands on a copy of it. I hate to admit this, but it's been 25 years. I guess I probably can. I pretended to be a girl named Jennifer, and I claimed that Heather Donahue was my distant cousin, and we as the family never knew what happened because we as the family never got to see the tapes. This guy online who claimed to have a copy of the movie believed me. And then I set about trying to get him to send me a copy of the movie a few weeks early, like a janky ass VHS copy of the movie. And I didn't want to give him my real address, and I didn't have the money for a P.O. box. So I just asked my neighbor, who was like a Rick Rollicking alcoholic, like, hey man, you mind if I give this random dude in Vancouver, British Columbia, your address to send me a bootleg copy of a movie that's not out in theaters yet? He was fine with it. But then, of course, leading up to the film's release, we come to find out that, oh wait, it's all fake. None of it's real. So he wasn't too happy. I never openly admitted that I was catfishing him, right? I mean, there wasn't anything really to catfish. I wasn't like, hey there, buddy boy, if you send me a copy of the movie, I'm going to show you some titties. I didn't do that. I didn't do that at all. I just was using the emotional of I just want to know what happened to my cousin. Homie bought it though, until he didn't. And then I kind of just, broke it off and went about my business and then saw the movie opening day. Still a story. I can't believe I did that. But I really love the first movie. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it heavily influenced my first feature film, In Search Of, as well as the movie The Last Broadcast, which I will definitely be doing an episode on. But what you guys got to remember about Blair Witch is that this is like a 2016, it is a sequel. It's a sequel to a movie that doesn't necessarily need a sequel. And this is also coming off of me working on the movie Devil's Pass, which was a 2012 Rennie Harlin directed found footage that was meant to be a sequel to the urban legend of the Dyatlov Pass incident. And I should do an episode on that one at some point in time because I have my own interesting backstory with it. So a sequel to something that already is so iconic, urban legend movie or other, seems like a little bit of a tall order. But Adam Wingard's a good director. and everything. As we've seen recently, Godzilla X Kong just was like rocking $500 million worldwide. You know, he's working on a Thundercats movie, probably a third Godzilla Kong film. So the dude is definitely working right now, and he's feasting good. So congratulations to him. But this was meant to be a movie that was like something that they didn't really have a lot of like control over. I think Lionsgate already had this movie in mind. They already had the idea what they wanted to do. They wanted to do a sequel to the original film. They didn't want it to touch upon anything with Blair Witch 2. In fact, the original idea for this was actually being developed in 2009 with the original franchise creators Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez. But it faced delays until Wingard and Simon Barrett were hired, which is weird to me because the first movie had only a budget of like $27,000 initially. It ballooned once he went into post-production and audio sweetening and buying the licensing rights to like the Tiger's Milk Bar, which there's an interesting tidbit about that in the original movie's audio commentary, which I would recommend you give a listen to. But Paranormal Activity movies, first one, $11,000, roughly $11,000 to $15,000 was the budget. The next set of films had about a $5 million budget. This movie had about a $5 million budget. I don't quite know what exactly the problems are going to be in regards to any of this. Like, that's kind of what I'm saying. I don't really know what the issues are with this movie and why they couldn't raise the money. I don't know. Maybe I'll be able to ask some questions. I would love to be able to interview Daniel Myrick or Eduardo Sanchez just to kind of peel back the layers of the Blair Witch universe. Because for me, when I first heard of this movie, I was like, yeah, this is one that like, I really want to know what the lore is, right? I want a lore dump. I want to expand upon what happened to the three filmmakers in 1997. I want to know what's going on with the witch. I want to know all of these things. And I was really hopeful that this movie was going to do that. And I'm just going to be honest here. It didn't do that really at all. It played it too safe without really gutting into the weeds. And then when they did get into the weeds, it became more of a mixture of like Evil Dead and maybe something to do with aliens. I don't quite know. The movie doesn't really know what it wants to be when it gets to the climax. But it's still an engaging movie. And I'm not going to lie. I'll talk about this when we get to it towards the end of it. But I even became super claustrophobic watching it last night. And like that, it eeried me out. It creeped me out to the point of where like, I literally was like, okay, so I have a CPAP machine because I'm a 42-year-old man with sleep apnea and I'm just getting used to wearing it. So I have to put these nose cushions on. And as it's projecting air into my nostrils, I'm watching this movie and there's a part where one of the actresses gets stuck in like this hole. And it was so claustrophobic for me on top of the fact that the machine malfunctioned. So it became harder for me to breathe as I'm watching the scene unfold. So for me, I'm just like, I'm starting to sweat. I'm starting to get hot. I'm starting to freak out. I don't know if it's the machine, if it's my brain, if it's the movie. I was getting into it, but it was like, it was stressful. It was frustrating. And that really maybe kind of damaged my view at the end of the film. But I just saying like, don't watch this movie with a CPAP machine is really what I'm trying to say. But anyway, getting back into the production history of this film. This movie was actually kept pretty much under wraps, kind of like, 10 Cloverfield Lane was originally like Valencia. And then they added the Cloverfield aspect later on, but they still kind of shot it in secret. This movie was known as The Woods. That was its original title. That's what it was shown at Comic-Con when they initially showcased it. But Adam Wingard and Simon Barrett were known for their work on VHS 2. And they had actually met Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez at an event and kind of asked them like, hey, what's going on with the movies? Why are there no more Blair Witch? This is a great lore. It's a great setup. It's a great world. What's happening? Well, a few months later, they were called into Lionsgate and they were then pitched on the idea of taking over the Blair Witch movie. And I think it kind of worked because really what it was is their work on VHS 2. And I think like The Guest had come out at that point and there'd been a few smaller movies that Wingard had done and that Simon Barrett had written. The two of them very much had this reputation that I think worked out really well for them. And that's kind of what got them involved. And of course, this was produced by Lionsgate, who put up the $5 million. When the movie did get initially premiered at Comic-Con 2016, it was under the woods. I had some friends who actually went to go see it. I did not get the chance to see it when I was at Comic-Con that year, but they got to go see it. And they were like, dude, it's a Blair Witch movie. Oh my God, it's a Blair Witch movie. Oh my God, it's a Blair Witch movie. And they're fans like I am. And they kind of talked it up. And I was like, all right, cool, man. I'll have to check that out. It'd be great. And of course, just as through everything happens, 2016, the fall of 2016 was crazy for me personally. So I just didn't get to the theaters that much. But when the movie came out, it did pretty well. Not necessarily with critics. They gave it a mixed review, having about a 38% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 47% on Metacritic. The CinemaScore audiences gave it a D+, and I'm going to talk about that D+, because it earned that D+ with that ending. But it did end up grossing $45.2 million worldwide against a $5 million budget. It earned a total of $20.8 million in North America and $24.4 million internationally, but it was considered a box office disappointment. Never mind grossing, I don't know, like 9 times its budget, but that's not good enough. I don't quite know how well it did in regards to its home video sales, but I don't know. I mean, it did kind of like help reinvigorate the resurgence of like that found footage genre. And it did help maintain an interest in the Blair Witch mythology, of which there is a video game that I think came out around that time or a little bit later. And then Blumhouse just recently announced, and this is like weeks ago, that they are in the process of rebooting or developing a new Blair Witch movie. And I'm like, look, man, all I want out of that is a lore dump. And that's what I wanted out of this movie. Because this movie, it just didn't, like, it was interesting enough, but it ran afoul of, I think, a lot of found footage movies. And it relied too much on the advancements of technology and not enough on character development, as well as setting up genuine scares without what you would call post-production mindset. What I mean by that is, like, in moments of where you knew there was going to be a jump scare, you can tell that there was going to be a jump scare. The audio started to have background noise. That ambient noise started to swell. It started to get more intense, and you could feel that something was going to happen. Oh, and then it did. It became relatively predictable because they relied on the old concept of horror tropes in order to be able to try to sell some of the scares. Now, some of the scares were legitimately good. Don't get me wrong. But they relied too heavily on it, right? So one of the things, again, found footage. The found footage movie I did, 1 camera, 2 actors, 2 days. You can watch it for free, iso-themovie.com. Okay. I'll do my own Podio commentary on that soon enough. But they have not only their DSLR in this movie, they've got the other people, right? The other locals and everything that are very much having their own mini DV camera, and that comes into play. And then they've got these earpiece cameras that apparently shoot in really high resolution and really clear and low light settings that all have GPS functionality, but they never actually ever advocate for using the GPS functionality. There's a scene where a dude goes missing, right? There's a scene where Peter goes missing, and they're like, "Where's Peter? Where's Peter?" And like it cuts back to his camera view, which I thought was cool because it could jump between different perspectives, which was nice. But at no point was anyone like, "Oh, the GPS footage. We can just use the GPS." Never mind, there would have been an easy explanation for why that wouldn't have worked, given everything that gone on. But they still never mentioned it. And it was kind of just like, whatever. So let's talk about the movie itself, because I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here on this one. But the movie itself is all about James. Now, is his last name Donahue? We don't know. They never say. None of the characters in this movie have last names. But James is reportedly the brother of Heather Donahue, who went missing with the Blair Witch Project back in 1997. And he has spent his whole life wanting to know what happened to her, right? Which makes sense. It's a good setup to set it up from like a sibling going out and trying to uncover the mystery of what happens. So obviously he's got his friends, his best friend, Peter, who, went with him and his family to do searches for Heather back in Burkittsville, Maryland, back in the 90s when this whole thing happened. They established that he was there for that they've been friends all this time, all this stuff. And they can kind of think like maybe this isn't really the best idea, but they're not going to tell his best friend no. You know what I mean? Which I thought was kind of cool. And so I understand like the friends not wanting to tell their best friend no. But then you've got Lisa's character, who's a new addition to the group. Is she a romantic love interest for James? It's not really established, albeit there's like a little bit of sexual tension. She's a documentarian. She wants to go, she wants to go out there and film it, but they're like, go out there and film it for him, but don't film it for your class. Obviously, they needed a reason to be able to establish the found footage aspect of it or the documentary aspect of it. So they all travel out to Maryland. They all travel out to Burkittsville, and this is where they meet up with Lane and Talia, two people who had uploaded footage from what they believe to be Heather's final moments back in the 90s on a mini DV tape. You have to remember, I kind of skipped over this, but when they shot Blair Witch Project, they had a 16 millimeter camera, or was it an 8 millimeter? I think it was 16 millimeter camera and a like mini DV or just DV based cassette video, maybe VHS-C type camcorder. Or it was like it was just a home camcorder that they used as their B camera. And that's kind of what happened with this is like, they're talking about the cassette tapes. If you know anything about the original movie, you know that they had two cameras and everything else. So it is, they're trying to establish that connection, but they wanted Lane and Talia to tell them where they got the footage so they can then head out into the woods in order to then try to find what happened, because James thinks that Heather is still out there, or maybe something they can find some information. Like the motivations are good. The motivations are there. The motivations work for trying to establish the story. What doesn't necessarily work is when they get out to the Hickville, because that's basically what they're trying to establish with Lane and Talia, is that they go into their place. There's this huge ass Confederate flag pinned up right on the wall. Now, Ashley and Peter are both African-American, and they're kind of like, oh shit, here we go. But at no point in time was anything even remotely regarding that mindset. Whether or not Lane or Talia were racist is not even in any way established. It's not in any way brought up. It's just used as a plot point, right? To just like establish tension between the two groups. And that's really what it was. It was just Peter doesn't really trust him, but they decide to go out there anyway. And then they're all kind of talking. But then again, they kind of laugh at, the Hicks a little bit. All of them kind of laugh at the seriousness of it because, of course, right? Like these guys live out there. They've clearly wanted to go out into the woods. They want to go out there in numbers. They don't want to go out there alone. They think that the woods are haunted. I get all that. But they have to still establish some form of, animosity, right? Anger, frustration, distrust between the groups. And I think that was kind of weak, to be honest with you. Using racism as a crutch when no racism was exposed in the film, I think is really just like kind of lazy. It makes sense if they would have made comments, but they never made any comments. It was just kind of dumb. But then as the further they get out into the woods, they kind of realize that they're in the deep woods of Blair. This is all now state property. It's not owned by anybody, but there is a sign that says don't enter the woods after dark. And of course they go out there and they stay the night. And when they wake up in the morning, they hear some noises, obviously, as they're sleeping, but then they wake up and then they've got those little twig people and they're all freaking out. We got to go. We got to get out of here. And then as they go to get out of there, we find out that Lane had been the one to put those up. He had been the one to put those up. He had been the one to scare everybody, and then he faked everything. He was lying to them the whole time. And so there's that distrust, that break. Now, Ashley at this point, I forgot to mention, she's injured. She cut her foot when they were crossing a river. And somehow, again, this is kind of just where we get into some weird Evil Dead type stuff. She starts getting sick. Okay. It makes sense. She's in this river. They're trying to patch it up. She's just injured. She's tired, fatigued, sweaty, so on and so forth. But then we start having these weird moments where they sleep until 2 p.m. They have no real concept of time. Their GPS isn't really working, or they don't even really establish that, but time itself seems to stop. And later on that night, when they're camping again back at the same spot that they were, Lane and Talia come out of the woods and they apparently have been on their own for 5 days. when, according to the perspective of the audience, we've only seen them being gone for a few hours. So, of course, there's more distrust. Lane runs off into the woods. Talia stays. They try to get some sleep. More things happen. They wake up, and now you've got even more bigger of those twig people. Peter's gone, presumed just taken at this point. Again, they are trying to find him, but they can't find any of the GPS stuff. Never came up again. Ashley freaks out, sees that one of the tree people has Talia's hair. She goes to grab it, and she breaks it in half, and then it just like completely crumples Talia's body right then and there. Like, these are now like voodoo dolls. No explanation. I thought that was kind of weird. It was a cool scene nonetheless, but then everyone just takes off, right? Ashley tries to get a drone again. She ends up falling out of a tree. Something grabs her, drags her away. We don't see her again. They end up running through the woods. You know, this time you got James and Lisa, and they're trying to stick together. They come across the house randomly. Weird thing I noticed, though, is where they found the mini DV tape earlier in the film was underneath this tree that had been like destroyed by lightning. That same tree was right next to where that house then magically appeared. So we're in some weird time space continuum thing where nothing is really making any kind of sense. Now, but we do hear Ashley yelling in the house. James gets up, he runs on it, and he's just like, yeah, I'm going to find, I got to find Heather or whatever. Well, we think it's Ashley. It could be Heather. I don't know. They don't really establish it too well. So he's running in the house. The house is all just torn to hell. And then outside, he ends up getting like locked in a room. And then all of a sudden, it cuts back out to Lisa. So she then runs in. She goes another direction. She goes down into the basement. She encounters Lane, who has apparently now been there for years. He makes a comment, you look exactly as I remember you, but he's got a long beard. He looks like older, thinner. He starts to grab her, and he throws her in this pit with like this like drop hole, locks the cellar on top. And he just yells out, you have to do what she tells you. You have to do what she tells you. He runs away. And this is where it got to that claustrophobic scene. And again, I was sitting there and she goes into this hole, and I'm already claustrophobic as it is. On top of the CPAP malfunctioning, my breathing becoming labored, my fear kind of setting in, the fight or flight kind of moment. It really added to the scene, but it really just made me angry more than anything else. She gets through there. And as she gets out back into another part of the cellar, Lane attacks her again, but this time she has a knife. She stabs him once in the neck. He dies. She ends up running into James. They run up. They get together. They're upstairs in the attic. They don't know what's going on. All they know is just like, don't look at her. Don't look at her. And so when the creature is coming, and this was actually pretty inventive in regards to like how to tell the story, I'll fully admit. But when that happens and they're in the corner, James is like, just don't look at her. Don't look at her. Don't look at her. Don't look at her. And Lisa's like got her eyes open, but she's like, I'm not looking, and then all of a sudden James says like, I'm sorry, Heather. And then he opens his eyes and he's grabbed by something. And then Lisa's trying to find her way to get back out. So she's using the camera's viewfinder, the LCD, to try to like make her way back and to avoid whatever creature it is, because they do, establish that like the witch was, held up and like had her arms, kind of like torn, like tied to rocks as she was in trees so it would elongate them. And that's kind of what we saw of the creature as it's running around. We get glimpses at that. But then also it's kind of like the weird space-time continuum. And then as they're in the attic before everything goes down, like like what appears to be UFO lights light up the entire attic. Like, where did that come from? Where did any of this come from? Weird. And then, of course, Lisa's walking backwards, and then she hears James say, like, I'm sorry, Lisa. And then she goes, James, and then she gets grabbed, and then the camera falls, and that's where the movie ends. I know it wasn't going to have a happy ending. I know that. I get that. I can acknowledge that. My biggest complaint with it, though, was just like, why? Why are they, okay, for one, like everyone has the high quality earpiece camera with GPS that they never use. They've got the drone, which is cool for getting establishing shots. And they kind of mentioned that early on in the film. They've got the DSLR camera, then the other camera, that Talia and Lane had that cuts back to that. So whoever made this movie, whoever put this together, like had access to everyone's information. It's almost like, what was that one? Like the Chernobyl tapes or whatever that movie was, or Chernobyl, I forget what it was, right? It's like, how do you get this footage out? The original story was these people went missing. A year later, their video footage was found in a backpack underneath this house. And this is what we found. And then on top of that, they built out the lore from the website, using the website, establishing the news documentary, all that stuff as a way to sell us on the storyline at that time. That to me just is lazy, because it's like you're wanting to make a sequel to this. You set it up as a sibling wanting to run through and find his sister, which makes all the sense in the world, drags his friends in, makes all the sense in the world, has kind of like the love interest with the girl. That was nice. There was a scene early on where she gets scared and she kind of runs to his tent and she's like only just kind of in her underwear and like a shirt. And she's like, oh, I guess I'll go back to my tent. And he's like, no. It's like, stay here if you want. She's like, okay. Because she feels comfortable around him. So they're establishing a romance that then never goes anywhere, really. Like they never say anything. I wish they would have said something. Like they're going to die. We know they're going to die. At least have them in that moment express that they have affection for one another, right? They do it kind of non-verbally. Maybe I'm just being a stickler, I'll admit. But the technology part of it bothers me, because it's like, even in my movie, my POS found footage, I say like the footage was found in a backpack at the San Diego Tijuana border. You know what I mean? So like at least establishing that it was left somewhere and then somebody put it together. In this particular realm of the space-time continuum being all crazy, where time doesn't matter, where people are operating separately from each other in regards to the time-space continuum, there's potentially aliens, potentially witches, whatever. That's the thing I'm going to harp on. Because you've lost me in this. You've lost the suspense of disbelief, right? Suspension of disbelief. You've lost that a little bit simply because of all that stuff. You know what I'm saying? And that's a big problem. That is a big problem. So, yeah, a fine movie. I don't know if I'd watch it again, but if you haven't seen it, I would say give it a shot. You can find it right now on DVD, Blu-ray, and 4K. Apparently it's available on Amazon Prime and Hulu. So if you don't want to pay money or to get the streaming services, and it's available to find anywhere. Came out 8 years ago almost. It's not going to be that expensive. I think it's worthwhile to see, but let's kind of, as always, I want to get your thoughts and your opinions on this. Let me know in the comment section of YouTube. You guys can find me at 3 Buck Theater or on Twitter at Podio Commentary. If you're listening to this on iTunes, please feel free to leave a review. And if you want to call in, I'm gonna post some films I'm gonna be talking about. We have a voicemail line, 323-400-4956. This one was kind of quick. I just kind of did it. But here's a couple little things you may want to know about the movie before we wrap it up, in case you want a little bit of fun and interesting tidbits. The tunnel sequence that gave me claustrophobia and really kind of made me angry was actually done involving practical effects. They caused the camera operator to himself have a panic attack during the filming of that scene. So it's, for me, at least there's validation. I'm not the only one. To Adam Wingard, congratulations, you got the desired effect. There is a few times in the movie where like the camera kind of freeze frames and we see like a little bit of digital interference. And it's during that time we get frames from the original film in that, which I thought was kind of interesting, albeit largely kind of inconsequential. And then, it's just, there's a theory about the root that was pulled from Ashley's leg wound, because she gets injured. There's this root in her leg. Then that it starts pouring, all this pus starts coming out. There's stuff later on about like, roots growing and things along those lines. And it's just like the world is coming to life. And again, this is where we get into some Evil Dead type territory. And I didn't necessarily think that worked out so well for it, to be honest with you. I think the movie ultimately is kind of a mishmash of a multitude of different stories and styles of filmmaking brought together under the guise of kind of a very low budget running gun point of view found footage movie that's meant to be more cinema verite and play upon our base fears, but it still needed to have that Hollywood sheen to it because that's the way the machine operates. And I think that's actually one of the biggest detriments to the film. I thought the characters were fine. I thought the story was good. I just wanted there to be more in regards to tension between Lane and Talia, as well as the rest of the group, because they established something that never played up again. And then everyone had their own individual camera, and then somebody had to edit it. Somebody had to sweeten the audio. Somebody had to add the atmospheric background track and all that stuff. And it just takes away from what it is. That's always the biggest problem with found footage, is people who try too hard. And ultimately, Blair Witch 2016 tries too hard. But as always, I want to hear your thoughts, your opinions. Thank you guys very much for listening to this episode of Podio Commentary. I'll talk to you all later. Have yourself a great one. Thank you again, and peace out.